Welcome back to the Tundra, episode 26, presented by Nicolet Law. He's John Kuhn, Packers legend. I'm Matt Schneidman of The Athletic. John, football season is back in full swing. We came to you from the Combine last week. It's free agency preview time. Now, this year for the Green Bay Packers, the intrigue is more so about the guys they're probably going to lose than guys they might bring in, but we're going to cover it all. We're going to cover each of the guys that they have on their own team set to hit free agency. We're going to cover some guys they might be targeting from other teams. We're going to cover the unrestricted free agents, the restricted free agents, the exclusive rights free agents, your one-stop shop for everything Green Bay Packers free agency ahead of the legal tampering period that starts on Monday, as we record this on Tuesday, March 3rd, and then the official start of the new league year next Wednesday. So I think a lot of people's free agency lists, not just the Green Bay Packers, John, start with Malik Willis, the number one free agent quarterback on the market. I'm going to be referencing Daniel Popper's top 150 free agent rankings on The Athletic a lot here. Malik Willis was number 9 overall on that list, the top quarterback on the market. Brian Gutekunst has already said he's good as gone. I think at this point, it's about Gutey being enticed by the third-round compensatory pick he's probably going to get in return for Malik for next year's draft.
Yeah, and give Malik a lot of credit, right? What he came in here and did with Matt LaFleur, with this Packer team, he took 2 years where the Tennessee Titans didn't believe in him, and he turned that into now being the most coveted free agent quarterback in this year's free agency period. So I give Malik a lot of credit for not just what he did with the Packers, because when he went in there, he performed in absence of Jordan Love, and because of that performance, he is now going to get a bag, a big old bag.
And he deserves it. And Brian Gutekunst, and you know this being around him long as you have, he doesn't like to divulge a lot of his plans. But when we spoke to him a couple weeks ago, he frankly said, you know, Malik is probably going to get an opportunity to play more elsewhere. So he knows they're going to have to find a new backup quarterback. That's a discussion for another day. The teams I've narrowed it down to: Cardinals, Jets, Browns, Dolphins. The Dolphins are going to have a tough time, especially with what they're going to have to do with Tua's contract, fitting Malik Willis under their cap. That's a problem for former longtime Packers executive John Eric Sullivan to figure out. Arizona, there's obviously the tie with Mike LaFleur, Matt's younger brother, as their new head coach, and Nathaniel Hackett, their offensive coordinator. Then the Jets and Browns also have quarterback needs. In this top 150 free agent rankings, Daniel Popper, who also is our Chargers beat writer, but watched weeks and weeks of film on all these free agents for scouting reports, contract projections, and all that stuff. Go look at it. It's great. The contract projection he has in here for Malik Willis is 2 years, $46 million. That's pretty impressive for a guy who only started, 6 games over the last 2 years.
Yeah, but it's well deserved, and it's comparable to what some other quarterbacks that have bounced around some teams had gotten to compete for starting jobs elsewhere within the last couple of years. And this is going to be a big opportunity for Malik Willis. I'm happy for him. I'm happy, right? This is like the Packers of the 90s when they had Matt Hasselbeck and they had Kurt Warner and they had Mark Brunell on the team behind Brett Favre. They get an opportunity to go elsewhere and prove their weight here in this league. And I see no reason why Malik Willis can't be one of those guys, go out there and earn that. I'm going to be your now franchise quarterback of the future.
Number 13 on that top 150 is Packers left tackle Rashed Walker. People might be thinking Rashed Walker is going to get paid. He's a serviceable starting left tackle in the NFL, and those do not grow on trees. Dan Moore from the Pittsburgh Steelers signed a 4-year, $82 or $84 million contract in free agency last year. He's nothing special either. That's going to probably be around what Rashed Walker signs. He's probably better. And you also have to add in the fact that Jordan Morgan is the Packers left tackle in waiting. Brian Gutekunst, I said he doesn't like divulging his plans. When we spoke to him at the Combine, he said, there's a chance we bring Rashed back. No, there isn't. There is no chance because you have to start Jordan Morgan somewhere. That's going to be at left tackle. It would be malpractice to pay Rashed Walker what he's going to earn on the open market and have him compete for a starting job. So Packers are going to have Jordan Morgan and Rashed Walker, John. That could get the Packers another third-round compensatory pick based on the size of the contract he signs.
Yeah, and I think when you look at free agents, you got to look at what's the cost of keeping them And what's the cost of letting him walk away, right? And for Rashed Walker, he was in a competition last year with Jordan Morgan, but he won that competition. That makes him one of 32. One of 32 people in the world that can start at left tackle in the National Football League, and he did that. And when you say he's serviceable, he's a starting left tackle in the National Football League. He might not be Trent Williams. That's all right. You don't need to be Trent Williams when you're a starting left tackle in the National Football League to get a bag. So the cost of leaving him, or the cost of him leaving, well, that's going to be Jordan Morgan. Jordan Morgan's got to fill that role. The cost of keeping him, that's $20 million a year. Yeah, they don't add up to one another.
No, they do not. And, with Rashed, the return on investment is great there. Same with Malik Willis. You traded a 7th-round pick for Malik Willis, probably going to get a 3rd in return for losing him. You drafted Rashed in the 7th round, probably going to get a 3rd. And it's interesting you brought up the dilemma, if you will, and I think we discussed this a little bit on last week's show, that Brian Gutekunst has to ponder when he's making these decisions. I asked him in Indy last week, how does the projection of some of these high comp picks that you're going to get factor into your decision making? And he said, it factors in certainly, but he said for a team that's in win now mode, they're never going to prioritize compensatory picks over a guy they think can help them win now at that price. The price comes into play here. So the Packers aren't going to say, we're just going to let a guy that can help us win now that we can afford walk because we like the comp pick we're going to get for him a year from now. That's not going to help you win now. But I do think with Malik Willis and Rashed Walker, letting them walk are, easy decisions. Now, this next guy, John, number 30 on the top 150, I still think it's a relatively easy decision, maybe not as easy. Romeo Doubs. What's your view on him as the Packers head into free agency here?
I think in order to get the development of the younger wide receivers that were behind Romeo Doubs this year, i.e. Matthew Golden, Savion Williams, you have to create that void. You have to create that opportunity for them. And Romeo Doubs was just the security blanket, kind of the crutch for Jordan Love through a lot of part of these last couple years. Guy you went to a lot of times in crunch time, 4th quarter, needed a big shot down the field, go to Romeo Doubs. He did a great job here in Green Bay, and unfortunately with him, there's just too much talent behind him to pay him top dollar to be here. You can't really pay him to be a wide receiver number 1 because his production has never been wide receiver number 1, especially when you have very capable wide receivers you feel very good about their upside behind them. So I just think the depth of the wide receiver position in Green Bay is going to make it an easy decision to not bring back Romeo Doubs.
Yeah, I think he's a solid number 2 wide receiver in this league. Over the past 4 years, he led the Packers in catches by a wide margin over Jaden Reed. I think by like 64 catches or something. Led them in receiving yards over that span. Led them in touchdown catches over that span. He's been a great 4th-round pick for the Packers. But again, he's going to get a lot of money on the open market. And like you said, you ride into 2026 with a top 3 of Christian Watson, Jaden Reed, and Matthew Golden. And then you have Dontavian Wicks and Savion Williams too. I just don't think it'll be worth the price. Here's another fascinating one, John. And here's where the decisions start to get tough, I think. Quay Walker, number 59 on the top 150. I brought up on last week's show that when Brian Gutekunst was asked at the Combine what positions he thinks need the most competition this coming season, he said secondary and inside linebacker were his top 2. Secondary makes sense because corner, you need more competition there. Inside linebacker raised my antenna a little bit because if you have Quay and Edgerrin Cooper and Isaiah McDuffie and Tyron Hopper, and those last 3 guys are still under contract, you don't need competition. The only way you need competition there is if Quay signs somewhere else. I'm not saying Brian Gutekunst tipped his hand, but I do think it's interesting. What do you think of Quay as a player and whether he's worth, I don't know, $10 million if that's what he makes on the open market per year?
Quay has developed quite a bit here in Green Bay over his rookie contract. And remember, we had some of the discipline issues early on, getting kicked out of games. He put that behind him, and he turned into one of those physical stalwarts inside, especially, rushing the passer. When you give him an opportunity to see ball, hit ball, Quay Walker can produce very well. This is the first one out of the free agents that you mentioned that I could see a price to keep not being so exorbitant that it make sense versus the price to let walk away. You wouldn't then necessarily have that need at competition at inside linebacker. With that being said, Isaiah McDuffie can start for this Packers team through a stretch of games or an entire season. So you would add competition through the draft or maybe even some free agents. This is the first one that I could see potentially coming back here as a Green Bay Packer.
I agree. I ultimately think he doesn't come back, but I could see him coming back more than Doubs, Rashed Walker, and Malik Willis. Mm-hmm. All three of those guys who I think are as good as gone. And that I'm not trying to say that disrespectfully. These next two guys, John, I think.
And the reason, but here's the deal. The reason those four guys are probably, and I say probably, three of them I agree with you are good as gone. One probably is because they're that good, because they have played and performed that well. So they deserve to get paid, and the Packers are going to have to look. The Packers are paying a lot of star players right now. So they got to pick and choose who they pay as their stars, their leaders of their team. Those positions seem to have what looks could fill in and fill those voids with younger players beneath them. So because they have performed is why they are likely gone.
I want to touch on two more guys before we get to our first break here, John. And these two guys, I think the pendulum is leaning toward them returning. Sean Rhyan and Kingsley Enagbare, both guys who are going to be unrestricted free agents as 2022 draft picks. Sean Rhyan was a third-round pick, I believe, and then Enagbare was a fifth-rounder. They have a hole at center, and I think you got to release Elgton Jenkins. We talked about it last week. For as great as he's been for this team, he's 30, coming off a major injury. They free up about $20 million in cap space, and he wasn't great at center. Sean Rhyan improved drastically at center throughout the year. Brian Gutekunst said as much when we spoke with him at the Combine last week. You can get him for probably an affordable price. He has that familiarity with Jordan Love. I think you bring back Sean Rhyan to be your starting center next year.
I agree. I think the price to keep outweighs, or the price to let walk outweighs the price to keep here on this one. I think you need to keep Sean Rhyan. I think you need to bring him back. Offensive line was one of those spots last year that you just felt never really got into a groove, never really hit a stride. And it was probably the weak spot on the offense specifically last year. And because of that, you can't afford any more holes in what looks like is going to have a major hole because of Elgton Jenkins being a cap casualty.
And Kingsley Enagbare, this is an interesting one because you could probably get him for an affordable price too on the open market. I look back for a quote on Kingsley Enagbare, and I found one from Jeff Hafley on December 20th, just singing the praises of this guy, how he played against the run in the past, how he works in practice, the kind of guy he is. And that obviously only counts for so much, but that's a ringing endorsement from Jeff Hafley. I also think, John, this is a position you need to look at what's going on around him when weighing should the Packers bring him back. You got Micah Parsons, who might miss the first month of the season finishing his ACL rehab. They might cut Rashawn Gary. Are you going to rely on both Barron Sorrell and Colin Oliver to play crucial roles in their second years? And Lucas Van Ness is going to play a pivotal role regardless. But the two big ones are Parsons and Gary. Just for body's sake, I think you need an Enagbare, but he also played well enough last year that even if everybody's healthy, you can make a case for bringing him back.
All that and the fact that the Packers like to rotate their edge rushers. I mean, Micah Parsons doesn't like to be taken off the field, but he still has to come off every now and then when he is healthy and when he is back. But at the beginning of the season next year, when Micah is likely not playing for the Packers, who do you have right now that's a sure thing? Lucas Van Ness. You're going to need to add bodies to that rotation. Kingsley could fill that at not a crazy price.
I agree. All right. We got a lot more to get to. There are a couple other unrestricted free agents, exclusive rights free agents, restricted free agents. For those who don't know what those different terms mean, we'll explain it, but not in this segment. So take a quick break. You're listening to The Tundra. This episode of The Tundra podcast is brought to you by Nicolet Law. Nicolet Law wants to cover two things in this ad. First, getting quality injury representation should never depend on how much money someone makes. That's why their firm works on contingency, which means they only get paid if they recover compensation for their clients. Second, that compensation should account for every way an injury affects a person's life. Nicolet Law's attorneys build comprehensive cases so that their clients can take the time they need to recover. So yes, if you've been injured, you can afford a lawyer. And Nicolet Law wants to make sure you can afford your full recovery too. Call 1-855-NICOLET or go to nicoletlaw.com. Welcome back to the Tundra, episode 26, presented by Nicolet Law. Okay, John, first segment, we touched on the Packers' 6 top unrestricted free agents. We think Willis, Walker, Doubs are as good as gone. Quay Walker on the fence, Sean Ryan, and Kingsley Enagbari probably back. We got a handful more guys to touch on, and we're going to start with Trevon Diggs. I know he's technically not one of the Packers' own UFAs because they already released him, and so it's not like an expiring contract. It's an already expired contract. But do you think the Packers should explore bringing him back? They need depth at cornerback. Brian Gutekunst has said that. Trevon Diggs expressed his desire late last season to find a home here pretty much. He has familiarity here, but is a cornerback who's clearly past his prime worth still kicking the tires on as an attempted solution to the Packers' cornerback issues?
Well, I believe one of those positions he said that needs competition is the cornerback position. And quite frankly, Trevon Diggs is a guy that there were a couple years he had immense production in the National Football League. And not that he needs to be that cornerback one, which is what his salary was. And that's why the Packers released him and let him go. But can he be a guy that is serviceable and takes reps in games and chews up clock when this defense is at full strength? I think he could be. I think that's why they brought him in last year at the end of the year to get a firsthand kind of interview look at him against the Minnesota Vikings in that last game, which is what they got for about the first half. They didn't play him in the wild card game, so they didn't think he was ready to take reps in playoff format over Carrington Valentine or over Keyshawn Nixon. But with a camp and with a new defensive coordinator, could he potentially fit in there? He could definitely be a guy that the Packers kick the tires on.
Yeah, and the Packers were always going to release him because for 2026, Diggs' contract, I believe, had a base salary of $15.5 million. The Packers and no team was ever going to pay that. So it was just kind of a trial run for, okay, could this be a guy we see being part of our team next year? But he now hits the open market and has the right to negotiate with 31 other teams. Okay, 3 other unrestricted free agents for the Green Bay Packers. John Fitzpatrick, we'll run through these quickly. A good depth piece at tight end, solid blocker, but he tore his Achilles in week 16, and that's going to complicate things here in free agency. Nick Niemann, a special teamer, a core special teamer at that, who came back late in the season. Not really any use at linebacker, but an important special teams piece. That new special teams coordinator, Cam Accord, I think I'm pronouncing that right. I should probably go look at a pronunciation guide before I interview the guy. Cam will have to see if Nick Niemann fits into his plans after Rich Bisaccia stepped down. And then Christian Welch, another guy who is really just a special teams player, also plays linebacker. But Welch was only promoted to the active roster once Nick Niemann went down. So do you see any of those guys worth keeping, or is it really up to Fitzpatrick's recovery and then the new special teams coordinator to decide if he sees Nick Niemann or Christian Welch fitting into his plans?
Yeah, I think they could all be brought back, right? The price on any of them is not going to be too high. And it's just, where do you want to compete? Do you think that their core special team value that they brought to your team is high enough to come back and compete again? Welch has been here now for
long time,
off and on and back and forth.
Yeah.
I mean, he went to the Ravens before he came back again, and we've released him again, and then he went somewhere and came back. So they got a lot of familiarity with Welch. I would not be surprised if any or none of these guys were back next year. But like you said, they need to work out a settlement with Fitzpatrick if they don't bring him back.
Okay, now on to the restricted free agents and exclusive rights free agents. Some notable names in here, even though it is kind of the lower classification of free agent. First, a quick explanation. So with restricted free agents, I'm going to try and explain this in layman's terms. You offer a tender, basically. You tender them at a certain level. There are several levels of tenders. There's a first-round tender, second-round tender, original round tender, and right of first refusal tender. Each one comes with a different salary, pretty much. I'm reading off the NFL site. First-round tender, about $7.5 million, and this is a one-year contract. Second round tender, $5.3 million. Original round tender, $3.4 million. Right of first refusal, $3.3. So basically, a second round tender, you sign them to that deal, and if another team matches it, you get a second round pick in return. Same with a first round pick. Original round tender, let's say you tender a 7th round pick at whatever salary I just said. If another team matches that, the draft choice compensation is a pick in return that the player was originally drafted in. For right of first refusal, there is no draft compensation tied to the tender. So the Packers have a couple interesting guys, and 2 have already been reported as they're letting them hit the open market. I reported last week that the Packers are not tendering Zane Anderson, which it makes sense. His base salary was $1.17 million last year, according to Over the Cap, and the lowest level of tender would pay him $3.3 million. So they can just not tender him, let him hit the open market, and bring him back at a salary below 3.3. ESPN also reported that the Packers are not tendering Emmanuel Wilson, so he will become an unrestricted free agent. That's what I want to touch on you with, John, because Emmanuel Wilson is a really good backup running back, I think. Provides a great change of pace, even flashed at times last year that he maybe could be a starter. I think by letting him hit the open market, the Packers risk losing him, and now all of a sudden, running back could become a need in free agency or the draft if they lose him.
Yeah, I'm interested on the kind of poker play that it was to decide this. Right of first refusal, if I'm not mistaken, Emmanuel Wilson was not drafted.
Correct.
So you're not going to get a draft pick. You don't have to tender him at his original draft pick place. You can just tender him at right of first refusal. What is that money? How much was that? Because
$3.263 million, and a team has the right to match the offer sheet signed, but there is no draft compensation that the Packers would get in return.
Yeah, but as I believe this to work, the team has to actually offer him a contract. He has to sign that contract, and the Packers have the right of first refusal. So the Packers could match a contract that they offer him. This one's surprising to me because if a team went out there and said, "Hey, Emmanuel Wilson, we'll pay you, $5 million for 2 years," the Packers could have matched it.
Right.
And potentially did that. Maybe they think Emmanuel Wilson would get a lot bigger of a contract, so they're just letting him test the free agent markets. And if they're wrong, then they can bring Emmanuel Wilson back at a lower price. I suspect Emmanuel Wilson will be back. I suspect the Packers will be competitive with whoever is kind of wooing or trying to bring Emmanuel Wilson in, trying to sign Emmanuel Wilson for competition. Maybe there aren't a lot of teams. Maybe there are some teams, and the Packers say, hey, we're going to have to go into free agency or the draft here and bring in a running back as well. But he's a guy who really filled in nicely for Josh Jacobs while he was out last year dealing with that knee injury. I would be nervous about the depth at the running back position if he does not come back, knowing you really only have Chris Brooks and Josh Jacobs. And I think Chris Brooks is also a restricted free agent.
He is. And yes, thank you for clarifying that, John, because I probably didn't do a great job of verbalizing that. If Emmanuel Wilson were to sign an offer sheet with another team, the Packers have the right to match that. And if they don't match it, that's when they would get the draft compensation back. But with Emmanuel Wilson, there is no draft compensation because he was undrafted. So, yes, Chris Brooks, another unrestricted or restricted free agent, I should say. We don't have to go through all these guys case by case. But the other restricted free agents who I have not seen their statuses reported on or decided, Darian Kinnard, that's an interesting one, a veteran swing tackle. The Packers need some depth on the offensive line. I could see them wanting to retain him. Aaron Mosby, a four-phase player on special teams, another guy who the new special teams coordinator is going to have to evaluate. Josh Wiley, Jonathan Ford, the defensive tackle, Chris Brooks, and Brenton Cox is an interesting one. Injured for a lot of last season. He's a guy who's flashed at edge rusher. When we talk about the edge rusher position, we obviously talk about the main guys, but the depth pieces, we talk about Bari, Barron Sorrell, Colin Oliver. What about Brenton Cox? Could he play a role on this team next year if they bring him back?
Yes, he absolutely could, and he probably will. I see the majority of the guys you just said coming back to Green Bay, but at vet minimum deals. That's probably the way they're going to work it for him. I spent a lot of time in that 1 year vet minimum kind of world when I was
That's your
playing.
world?
And I could see all of these guys coming back, free agency hits. They're talking with the Packers a little bit. Hey, we're going to hit our priority free agent guys first, then we'll come to you. And you just got to kind of check your ego at the door and understand if I'm going to have a chance back here, it will be with the Packers, but I got to wait for my time in that pecking order.
And one thing real quick, if you're wondering, why don't the Packers just, pay Emmanuel Wilson on a tender? Well, his base salary last year was $1.03 million, so they'd be giving him a pay raise of a couple $1 million, you could make an argument that they should do that, but there may be some, unwritten agreement that they're going to bring him back on a multi-year deal because the tender is just a 1-year deal. And maybe they bring him back on, I don't know, a 2-year deal for $7 million or a 3-year deal for $9 million. I do think he's a valued member of this team. That's one I think the Packers will be high on bringing back. And then 4 exclusive rights free agents. What an exclusive rights free agent is if the Packers want to keep them, they can. I'm reading the exact definition here from the NFL site. Any player with fewer than 3 accrued seasons and an expired contract. If his original team offers him a 1-year contract at the league minimum, the player cannot negotiate with other teams. So they can keep Bo Melton, Lacita Smith, Donovan Jennings, and Kamal Hadden at the league minimum if they want. Will they want to keep any of those guys? I don't know. Kamal Hadden coming off a major injury. That could be another injury settlement. Bo Melton obviously is a valued member of this locker room. Never played defense last year, but can play a little bit at wide receiver. Then the other 2 are depth pieces on the O-line. So a lot of work to do for Brian Gutekunst and his staff here in free agency. I would anticipate more of it is making decisions to let some of those big names that we mentioned in the first segment walk. I don't know that they're in a position to spend exorbitantly, but we will consider that option and ask that question when we get back from the break here. Can the Packers make a couple splash signings? And what does Brian Gutekunst think about that? Stick with us. You're listening to The Tundra. Welcome back to The Tundra, episode 26. This segment is brought to you by the fine folks at Potawatomi Sportsbook.
Hey, sports bettors, when you're into the game or trying to knock out 16 late parlays, it doesn't matter. The premier sportsbook you want is smack dab in the heart of Milwaukee, the Potawatomi Sportsbook. Not only do they have 90 betting kiosks, there's an all-star fine dining staff, first-class drinks, and a giant video wall. Whole lot to enjoy down at Potawatomi Sportsbook. It's nothing short of awesome. Bet above the rest.
And a reminder, John and I will be doing a live show from Potawatomi on April 7th, so a little over a month from when you're listening to this. Can't wait for that. We love getting down there to Potawatomi Sportsbook. Okay, John, we've talked a lot about the Packers' own guys that are about to hit free agency, whether we think they're going to bring them back or let them walk. Now it's time to talk about some guys the Packers might bring in from other teams. And if you look at over the cap right now, you see that the Packers currently rank 23rd in cap space. You might be thinking, well, they can't spend any money. They're approximately $4.1 million over the cap. But as there is every year, there are methods and levers to pull to become cap compliant. And not just become cap compliant, have plenty of cap space. For example, as we've mentioned several times on this show, releasing Rashawn Gary would free up $11 million in cap space. Releasing Elton Jenkins would free up about $20. So that's $31 million in cap space right there. There are other restructures that Russ Ball is in his lab right now, crunching all the numbers, moving all around all the bonuses to free up cap space. And I'm going to read you a quote from Brian Gutekunst at the Combine when asked if he thinks he's positioned well and positioned flexibly going into free agency. He said, and I quote, "I believe we have all the flexibility to do what we need." He said he feels really good about the Packers' positioning in free agency. Could we see the Packers make a splash signing or two, John Kuhn?
I think we could. You mentioned some of the ways that you could free up some cap space by letting some player goes, but when Russ Ball gets in there, and he's old school now, so when he takes that abacus and starts sliding those things across the dial there, you could see all kinds of ways that he could generate cap space for this Packers team going forward into 2026. I'm amazed every year with what they are able to do. And even when they had to kick the can super far down the road with Aaron Rodgers and his contract, there was a year or two where they were a little bit tight. But for the most part, they got out of that thing very quickly. That's because they planned for the future regularly. And a window is right now. Everybody acknowledges a Super Bowl window for this team is right now. So if you're ever going to leverage some years down the road in order to win now and make a splash, 2026 is it.
So what we're going to do now, John, we're going to go through a couple of the Packers' positions of need, and using Daniel Popper's top 150 free agents, I've identified just a couple guys at each of those positions that we think maybe could be fits with the Packers, or we could see being intriguing signings for the Packers. Let's start with, I think, what everyone can agree is their number one need, and that's cornerback. Brian Gutekunst has said they need competition there. A lot of people think they need starters there. We'll see what happens with Keyshawn Nixon's contract. Do they think Carrington Valentine can start again? What about Nate Hobbs? A lot of questions at cornerback. I'm not looking at the top of the market for cornerback where there are guys like Alontae Taylor from the Saints, Reek Woolen from the Seahawks, Jalen Watson from the Chiefs, and Nashawn Wright from the Bears. And even number 5 on the top 150 at corner is Eric Stokes, who's forecasted to get a 2-year, $20 million contract after playing well with the Raiders. 2 guys I'm looking at. Number 91 on the top 150, Josh Jobe from the Seattle Seahawks. And I'm pulling, obviously I haven't studied these guys extensively, so Daniel Popper has. So he has scouting reports for each of these guys. So I'm referencing those when I talk about these sorts of things. Josh Jobe started for the Seahawks on their Super Bowl defense, had a PBU and a TFL in the Super Bowl. He's 28 years old. I think that's an intriguing guy to maybe take a flyer on. That would be $10 million a year, so it's expensive. That's probably a deal that you're asking him to be your number 2 outside corner. Do they think, like I said, Carrington Valentine isn't good enough to start consistently at outside corner? Another one I'm looking at, Monteric Brown from the Jacksonville Jaguars, number 100 on the list. 12 passes defense this past season, 2 interceptions, played for Anthony Campanelli, the defensive coordinator, and obviously the former Packers inside linebackers coach under Jeff Hafley. Corner's a position I could see them going bargain bin hunting, not for a top of the line guy, but a guy on that, $7, $8, $9, $10, $11, $12 million a year range to maybe start alongside Keyshawn Nixon next year.
Yeah, maybe. I kind of feel like corner is a spot right now that if you could realign the depth, right? If you could bring in a guy that is a number 1 on a team, somebody that could handle that role, man, and you start working with Keyshawn Nixon is then the number 2 and Carrington Valentine is depth along with Nate Hobbs. It really creates an interesting dynamic there in the back end because Keyshawn Nixon is a cornerback 1, had some great moments with pass breakups, also had some moments when he really got targeted. If you can put him in the 2 role and leverage some help in his direction, he might star at the cornerback position. And then you're working at the nickel spot, Javon Bullard, competition alongside Nate Hobbs. So you have options there if you go higher and bring in a guy that you feel can really handle the load as a number 1 cornerback.
The second one I'm going to bring up is linebacker because Brian Gutekunst said they think they need more competition there. So I don't look at the top of the market for a guy like Devin Lloyd. I don't even look as high as Quay Walker. I go below Quay Walker because if they're not willing to pay Quay Walker, then they're probably not going to be looking at guys above him on this list. Granted, Brian Gutekunst's list of free agents might be different than this, but it might be around the same. Couple guys on that list. Eric Wilson, Body Beautiful, who has played for the Packers before, had a resurgent season with the Minnesota Vikings this past year. Caden Ellis from the Falcons, Nakobe Dean from the Eagles, Alex Singleton of the Broncos, and Leo Chenal, who played at Wisconsin. So I think those guys all in the $8, $9, $10 million a year range. If the Packers need a second or third inside linebacker, more so third because Isaiah McDuffie's your second. We don't know exactly how they feel about Tyron Hopper. And if Gutey thinks they need more competition there, one of those guys could be more of a bargain bin signing. And I know saying bargain bin for a guy who's making $8 to $10 million a year isn't exactly accurate, but work with me here. I'm looking at a couple of the bottom guys on this list. And obviously, John, that competition can come from the draft too. It doesn't just have to come from free agency.
Yeah, and I think you're talking about competition here because Isaiah McDuffie, as I said, is a guy that can jump in there and start for you in football games, and you will feel okay. You will feel comfortable with him at that spot. So you bring somebody in for competition, maybe they win it, maybe they don't. Maybe they're a serviceable piece when you go base packages and you have 3 inside linebackers in the game. So you have many different options there. With that being said, Quay Walker is still the first one on that list of agents that you said that we both think we would not be surprised 1 iota if he came back to the Packers. Well, however, you got John Eric Sullivan and Jeff Hafley down in Miami. They may make that really hard to do.
Quay Walker also a captain on the Packers, and there's a reason for that. So you can't discount that in all this as well. Here's a position we haven't really talked about in terms of the Packers maybe needing more bodies there. Tight end, John. Tucker Kraft coming back from a torn ACL. You think he's going to come back to full strength, but you got to maybe get some insurance just in case he doesn't. And I'm going to say this respectfully, Luke Musgrave is a lost cause. I don't think you can count on him doing anything consistent or reliable for you. We saw just that much when Kraft went down last year, how precipitous of a drop-off there was in production. Tucker Kraft's by far and away the best blocking tight end on the team. Josh Wiley is a restricted free agent, maybe could hit unrestricted free agency. John Fitzpatrick tore his Achilles. I'm going to give you 4 names. A couple of these guys are great blockers: Cade Otton, Adam Troutman, Austin Hooper, and Greg Dulcich, more of a receiving tight end. But if the Packers want a veteran presence in that room and they're kind of out on Luke Musgrave as Luke Musgrave heads into his final year of his contract here, one of these veteran options for $5 to $7 to $8 million a year could be an option.
Yes, but you got Tucker Kraft coming back. He's going to need a contract extension sometime in the very near future. So that's going to be money allocated to the tight end position. You still have Luke Musgrave for another year, so he'll be a part of the offense. And Gutey has done a phenomenal job of pulling guys like Ben Sims, Josh Wiley, Fitzpatrick here in the past. I wouldn't be surprised if he goes that route again. With all that said, I still think the biggest swings come at either the offensive line or the cornerback position.
I got 2 more positions I want to run through. Running back real quick, because like I mentioned in the last segment, Emmanuel Wilson is going to be an unrestricted free agent. What if a team just wants him to be their 1B? What if they want him to be part of a split backfield? Josh Jacobs is the Packers' feature back, and it's possible another team wants to pay Emmanuel Wilson more than the Packers do. So a couple guys outside the top 70 of these top 150 rankings: Rachaad White, the backup for the Buccaneers; Tyler Algier, the number 2 to Bijan Robinson in Atlanta; and Kenneth Gainwell, who really did some nice things alongside Jaylen Warren in Pittsburgh with Aaron Rodgers this year. All those guys are in the $5 to $5.5 million a year range. It's free agency, so these salaries for backups and depth pieces that we're talking about are not going to be ideal, which is why a draft and develop team like the Packers could just go with a draft to fill these needs. But that's part of the podcast. We're naming guys that maybe they could look at on the free agent market. What do you think about, John, a veteran back, like one of those guys I named, as opposed to rolling with a Chris Brooks at your number 2? Or you didn't even mention Marshawn Lloyd earlier. Are we just out on Marshawn Lloyd? I would be, but do the Packers maybe still have faith in him?
Did you say Aaron Jones?
No, but I know the Vikings
because
are
he hasn't been
release
released yet, but he is getting released.
Imagine if the Packers brought him back.
Veteran, and if you go after any veteran running back, you go after Aaron Jones.
We're going to need to clip this one, Adam. That might do well on social. If Aaron Jones is willing to just play on the vet minimum to come back to Green Bay and finish out his career where it started, not only would that be a great story, which is what I care about most, I also love covering Aaron Jones. He's the best guy ever. He's still got a little bit of juice left. The injuries are a massive issue. But if you bring him back for little enough where it doesn't hurt you if he gets injured, and with all due respect to him, he's probably going to, then I could see that maybe being something the Packers explore. He knows the offense. The guys love him. He still has some juice in the tank. He's 30 years old? Mm-hmm. I'm looking this up real quick. Aaron Jones is 31. He'll turn 32 this season. If he has 1 year left in him, why not finish in Green Bay? I like that. And then last group, I grouped together the interior defensive line and offensive line together. Darian Kinnard obviously fits into this category as a swing tackle who has experience in this system, played here last year, obviously, was kind of that 6th offensive lineman on the field when the Packers went jumbo. But Josh Jones from the Seahawks kind of fits that swing tackle mold as well. I could see them maybe wanting some veteran offensive line depth, even though they do like drafting multiple guys on the offensive line and developing him. That's a spot where I could see them drafting guys. And John, I wrote down Shelby Harris. And if you remember that name, it's because he was the one who blocked Brandon McManus's kick in Cleveland. And I think I remember a stat from around that time that Shelby Harris has blocked more kicks than anybody in the NFL from when he entered the league. Don't quote me on that. But if the Packers want to get better on special teams and be better on their field goal rush team, bring in a guy like Calais Campbell or Shelby Harris on a 1-year deal just to block some freaking kicks. How about that?
Bring them all in. Bring them all in. I think one or two big swings out of Gutey will be. There's potential for that, but in reality, this free agency is going to be about finding those glue guys on a team that can give you that play or two here or there throughout a season that we have been missing the last 2 seasons and why we haven't been winning the division. A couple plays here or there last season, they win the North. They're looking to get back there. It's not all, they have the stars to do it. They just need the complementary pieces.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to see a Xavier McKinney or Josh Jacobs type of signing here from the Packers, at least from a financial perspective, but there is certainly room for some more bargain bin signings that could make a difference. And we've seen those type of guys have an impact here in Green Bay in recent years. All right. Happy free agency to all, and to all a good night. We will be back with another episode next week. Legal tampering period, free agency. A lot to cover here in the next couple weeks as the 2026 league year gets underway. Please follow us, as always, Instagram, X, YouTube, the Tundra GB. Subscribe. We appreciate you all for listening. For John Kuhn, I'm Matt Schneidman. We'll talk to you next time.